Produced by Podcast Architects.
You're listening to the Lead On podcast, where we discuss experiences in the armed forces while exploring lessons from military leaders.
Welcome to another edition of Lead On, Lessons for Military Leaders. I'm David Deary with the Enlisted Leadership Foundation. In this podcast, we like to explore different leadership lessons from those that served in the military or have a direct relationship within the military. And joining me today is Laura McKenna, an Army, you didn't retire, you're an Army veteran. Mm-hmm. So Laura, good morning, how are you?
I'm excellent, David, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thank you for being here today. I understand, I think you're in the Arizona area, not here in California, although we're on the same time zone for about another week.
Another few days. Yeah,
another few days. So Laura, thanks for joining us today. If you would, just kind of share a little bit about who you are and a little of your military background.
For sure. Yeah. And thank you so much for asking me to be part of your podcast. I'm really excited to be here. So I am a West Point graduate. I graduated from West Point in 2001, commissioned as a military police officer. And then a few years later, branch transferred into aviation. I flew Black Hawk helicopters for a little bit. And then the Army sent me to grad school so that I had a degree that I could use to go back and teach at West Point. And that is where I concluded my military career. So I deployed to Afghanistan. I am an Afghanistan veteran. And I finished up my career teaching at West Point.
Well, very good. And I think when we talked last, you did about 13 years before you transitioned out. So before we start getting into more of the deep dive in the conversation, I always like to ask our guests, just to kind of kick things off. People are always offering us advice, rarely when we ask for it, just when they think we need to hear it. So what's the worst piece of leadership advice somebody ever gave, Laura? Could have been before the military, during, even after.
I love this question. I actually have two, and they're both pretty awful. The first one is don't get fat. And the other one is just be less you. So I'm going to just briefly describe both of them. So when I went into cadet basic training, also known as Beast Barracks, I gained 3 pounds. So when I entered West Point, I weighed 115 pounds. And at the end of Beast Barracks, I weighed 118 pounds. And my squad leader pulled me aside and said, hey, listen, you gained 3 pounds. You don't want to get fat. So you need to be really careful about making sure that you don't get fat, because it really presents the wrong image as a military officer, completely neglecting the fact that I was pretty teeny tiny, completely neglecting the fact that that could have been 3 pounds of muscle, given how many more push-ups and pull-ups I could do at the end of basic, which is the idea, than I could when I had arrived. And then also completely ignoring the fact that a woman who is menstruating, when I was 17 at the time, a woman who is menstruating between day 7 and day 21 of her menstrual cycle in a normal month can gain 3 to 5 pounds with there being no change to her lean body mass or percentage of body fat. So we completely, ignored all of those things. And I got the advice, like, just don't get fat because it looks bad, which I think was really interesting and, and leads me into the next one of like, just be less you. So I was finishing up my second summer of field training. And my squad leader was giving me, my end of training counseling. And he actually said, I think men just don't understand women. And he said, I just, you're really motivated. You get along really well with everybody in the squad. Like, you did really great, but I just feel like you need to be less you. And so he gave me a really low grade just because I needed to be less me. And in hindsight, it reminded me of, if you've ever seen How to Train Your Dragon, I know it's a little bit of a throwback and it's animated. So, I really enjoy my like animated classics, having been a mom. But there's this scene where, Hiccup, who's the main character, is saying like, he just doesn't get me. He doesn't like me. And his mentor says to him, like, essentially just be less you. The hiccup says, well, you just gestured to all of me. And he said, yes, stop being all of you. And that really was sort of what I received from those early, leadership lessons, is that success looked a certain way, and I didn't have that look. I think what I observed over the course of my military career is that many women were successful, myself included, because we tried to be as much like our male counterparts as possible. So there's no room for, you can be feminine and pretty and also be an effective leader, or you can have a naturally cheerful and bubbly personality and also be mentally tough, physically strong, and an effective leader. And so those were some just terrible pieces of leadership advice.
Yeah, I guess to tell somebody to be less of who they are, where you're supposed to be more of the person telling you to be less.
I think so, yeah.
And what makes that person the standard? It's just because they may have reached a higher pay grade doesn't mean, listen, we write our own evaluations in the military. And if you write something well enough, chances are you're going to get yourself promoted, even if you may not deserve it. And listen, I'm generalizing, and that's probably a very low percentage of people out there. 99% get those promotions and deserve it. But we're all probably guilty of offering some stupid advice that sounds good in our head, but that just doesn't translate well. Have you ever, it's just interesting, be less you. Have you ever encountered that with anybody else? As you shared that or thought about that over the years, did you ever encounter other people that were either told to be, nowadays we talk about be your authentic selves, which is the complete opposite. Okay. So if anything, it's like, come out of your shell, be more of who you are. Don't try to, as leaders, I think it's great to have our positive leadership qualities be mirrored. But I don't want another Laura McKenna or David Deary walking around either. Maybe if we did something that positively impacted you and as a leader, fine, but be your own person. But did you ever encounter anybody else that felt that they had to be somebody that they weren't, or they aren't?
I do think so. And with the women that I work with today, that is actually a recurring theme, that there's this concept of what right looks like. And it doesn't look like me. There's this ongoing battle between what I'm supposed to be and who I actually am. So we need to make that leader archetype bigger. There needs to be room for effectiveness that does not force me or expect me to be less of who I am. I think a lot of women that I work with have also been influenced by or impacted by the concept of perception as reality. And I think we heard that a lot in the military, that if someone perceives you to be weak because of XYZ, that's what you actually are. Or some of the other things that affected women in the military, like if you wore eyeliner, or, you just were pretty, that meant certain things about how you engaged in your personal life. And so we carry those concepts with us. I think we are shaped, our inner subconscious beliefs that create the outcomes in our life are shaped by those beliefs. And I think that's certainly one of them. And I interact with women all of the time who feel like they were told what they were supposed to be, and they internalized what they were supposed to be. And they are now in conflict between who they really are and what they really want for their lives and for themselves and for their relationships, versus what they're, supposed to be doing. And it leads to burnout. It leads to existential angst. It leads to relational issues. It leads to overwhelm and exhaustion and over obligation, and things that really keep us from making the positive impacts that we were put on earth to make as leaders. And not just leaders of organizations, but leaders of ourselves, leaders of our lives, leaders in our family lives. I think that it's possible to make an impact and also love your life. And I think that living in alignment with who you really are is really the path to doing that.
Yeah, I'm excited here in a few minutes to hear more about your engagement with these with other women and the impact that you're making in their lives. But before we do that, I do want to cover a little bit more of who you are, and I want to comment on this. Perception is reality, and I never liked that because who's just it's like people say, "What's just common sense?" Well, what's common where I grew up in San Diego may not be common out in Kentucky, right? And so my reality, my perception of reality doesn't mean that the reality is it's an accurate perception. It's like when people say, "Well, he or she shouldn't have acted that way or dressed that way, and that's why something negative happened to them." No, doesn't matter how you dress or act. Something bad should not happen to you. Using that as an excuse, right?
Yeah, reality is reality. Perception is
Exactly.
based on what other people think and believe, and the lens through which they are looking, over which I have no control. And so what you're describing is this constant anxiety around trying to control what other people think instead of just being and doing, and executing and leading. When you're so focused on, well, I've got to do this so that someone else will think this, we really lose the essence of our focus and our focus on the right things.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just think, something that a few years ago as the pandemic, maybe even before the pandemic started, actually, but in our leadership classes, both the Foundry and the LPO Academy workshop, we bring in a mental health person. And that was by recommendation of a former mentor in one of our classes. And I'll tell you, that has been it's been so engaging, so helpful to bring more awareness and attention. And I'm one of those people that for years, because I didn't, my perception, because of my reality, I didn't understand mental health. So I did not really give it its fair due diligence, if you will, because, this is what I think it is. So therefore, that's what it is. It's so wrong, and I've learned so much, and then I've changed because I just had to realize that that's a false reality. So, I think that oftentimes when we place our perceptions of reality impose that on other people, it's because we don't understand it ourselves. It's like the person that yells at the kid in the supermarket that's acting up. They're yelling because they're more embarrassed at what the child is doing, which is acting like the child that they are. But instead of just, I was walking through a Walmart over the weekend. Some guy had this kid over his shoulder walking. The kid's all upset. Dad's just shaking his head walking because the kid wasn't getting what he wanted. And that's okay. Dad wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't yelling. He's just removed. It is what it is. So, but listen, so you're a mom and you're a soldier, although not currently serving, but soldier and a mom. What was some of the angst that maybe a lot of joys, but we talked about a certain perception that kind of came with that and how that was looked. Why don't you share that with us?
Yeah, for sure. Certainly being a young mom and being a mom throughout my whole career impacted every aspect of my life. I felt sort of always pulled in different directions. I felt like in every aspect of my life, I was failing someone or I was failing in some way. And certainly I was failing at who I really wanted to be because of those seemingly competing obligations. And so, I had some challenging experiences, and this also is part of that, the ampersand or the concept of and that I really live my life by now is I wish I had known then that I didn't have to necessarily choose between being a really good mom and being a really good Army officer. That's how I felt. And it was really stressful. I mean, things like, when I was in flight school, I was there with a 4-year-old, and I had just had my daughter. And so I was breastfeeding. And so, at the flight line, I was bringing my flight bag and my breast pump. And it was complicated logistically to have to plan for all of these aspects of both my personal and my professional life. And I just think that's a great example. I tell the story of having to pump before I would go fly. but there were no arrangements, for moms. It's a Vietnam era flight line bathroom that, there weren't even plugs at like a normal level. Like they were all on the floor. So I had to sit on the floor, to pump before I could go out to the flight line. So even things just like the logistics of managing my life, it was really very stressful. It was really very complicated. And I learned to rely very heavily on the help of friends and family. I mean, my parents are really the rock stars of my career. I used to call them my moving fairies, because when I would arrive to a new duty station and have to go immediately to work, my parents, either both of them or just my mom, would come and, help me with moving in so that I could get quickly moved in. And then, really be able to focus on helping the kids get settled. And then, settling into the new job that I had just arrived to do. So absolutely, being a mom in the Army significantly impacted my entire approach to my career and my entire experience of my career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even my time in the Navy, both, whether it's a single parent, which there's plenty of, and God bless the single parents, how they, people sometimes say, a 6-month deployment isn't just 6 months. It's more like 12 months because of all the months before for the workups and everything, right?
Yes, and all the training to get ready for the deployment, for sure.
Right. And I can remember we did a command survey once, and it was a larger command I was at, and we used to have everybody check in on the ship at 6:30 in the morning. That's when Liberty expiration, and we always had about 40 people on average out of 1,000 people late every day. And so in the command survey, it came out that a lot of people define a lot, but there was comments that could we change the Liberty expiration, because it's really hard, whether it's a single parent or dual family, dual working family, to get the kids in daycare and then get on the base and park and get on time. And I'm like, you know what? I'm so glad. And so the COXO and I said, this is an easy fix. So we just shifted Liberty expiration to 7 in the morning. We didn't change the time we end the workday, because we left at the end of the workday, we left that up to each individual chain of command. When your work is done, you send your people home. We didn't feel like we needed to manage that. But what's interesting is the heat we got from those that don't understand it. And it's like, but we went from about 40 people average a day being late to less than 5.
Yeah.
Just like that.
Yeah.
And
it was because you took a reasonable approach to creating an environment that was best for what your people needed. And that isn't weakness. It's not, you're not giving in to people who are sniveling or whining and complaining. They don't need to suck it up, Buttercup. They have daycare hours that they have to stick to. They're not any lesser as professionals. So I really acknowledge you for acknowledging that, because it really, it's a huge difference when you're trying to drop kids off at daycare. I can distinctly remember, I think the first, definitely the first year, and then, the first several years later, then a year of never not having some manner of baby spit or baby vomit on. So I had to keep like an extra BDU blouse, to like change out, because I remember one day coming up to formation, having dropped my son off at daycare, and he had thrown up on me, and I didn't have time, because he had thrown up on me, to relate, getting him to daycare. And gosh, I had an amazing daycare provider. I still adore Miss Linda. Just an amazing human being and a wonderful family. But I didn't have time to change. So there I am. I'm a platoon leader in the front of the formation with baby vomit all down here. And David, I have to tell you, I got so many comments on both sides. Some that were, that's really unprofessional, and you need to tighten up your stuff, LT. But then I also got probably more comments that's really encouraging to us to see that you're real and you have a real life. And it actually made it possible for me to relate to the people that I was responsible for in a much more practical and meaningful way than if I had not ever had the experience of showing up to formation with baby vomit on my shoulder. It's part of humanity. There are humans in your formation, and we have to make allowance for their humanity. And there's that ampersand again. They can be mentally tough, physically strong, incredibly capable, operating with excellence, and also human beings with real lives and actual families and real needs that don't take away from that first set of descriptors. You can be an amazingly competent professional and also be a human.
Yeah, connecting with people, it's incredible when we think about this idea of connecting. John Maxwell, I teach a book called Everyone Communicates, Few Connect.
Yeah.
Because you communicated through that, not that was your druthers, right? You didn't want to have that, but that's just the reality of life. But how that incident connected you with other people and really what I find so important, especially as the senior person, the struggle is always being able to connect with those junior folk, right? Let them see that, listen, I'm not your mom, your dad. I make more money than you. I have a position of authority, but I still want to get to know you. We're in this together. We all are signed up to give our lives for our country. So we have that common bond. And those little opportunities that we have to show our humanity. And that's something that specifically in our foundry class that we drill home in the week that we have our students and our mentors is as the leader, it's incumbent upon you to humble yourself first, to connect with those below you. That doesn't mean you're fraternizing, doesn't mean you're taking them out to the bar for drinks, but it's just you letting them into your world, because otherwise, listen, they're going to give you the surface level stuff of what's going on, but you won't get down to the heart of the issues till they're so deep into it when they finally come to you that it's almost too late to help them. But if you establish those relationships, then maybe that trust, they'll have a little bit of confidence. They'll be scared, but they're like, hey, let me go talk to the LT. She may understand. And wow. And because your kid threw up on your blouse.
Right. On the regular, actually. That was like a normal thing. He wasn't like colicky. He wasn't like a vomity baby, but there was like never not spit on my shoulder. And I think, David, what you're talking about there is another leadership and a leadership lesson, things we need from leaders, is that it's possible to be hard on someone and also to care about them as human beings. And in fact, I think they're actually intimately connected, that we are hard on people and we expect the best from them and we want the best for them because we care about them. And we really see them as human beings with tremendous potential.
Spoken like a good parent.
Oh,
and that's a good point to pause, because this is going on for a while, and we haven't even talked about your strength and shield coaching. So we're just going to transition here. I'm going to have you back on. We're going to schedule another time with you.
Okay.
Because we'll come back for the next episode, and we'll do a second half if that's okay with you.
That's perfect. This has been so great. I have loved talking with you, and I would be absolutely thrilled to continue the discussion. This has been very fun and really spot on. I applaud you for talking about leadership. It's an important discussion.
No, I appreciate it. So again, you've been listening to Laura McKenna, an Army veteran, and I'm David Deary with the Enlisted Leadership Foundation. This has been another edition of Lead On, Lessons from Military Leaders. So please join us next week when you're going to hear part 2 of my conversation with Laura McKenna.
Produced by Podcast Architects.